welcome to another episode of Around the Verse. I'm Sean Tracy.
And I'm Eric Kyron Davis.
In today's update, we'll cause some Foley mayhem with the audio team, check in on the new flight model, as well as build a map and some structures. But first, let's see what the community has been up to.
Some players rang in the new year with a PvE event that ended up becoming a massive PvP battle.
Snipers engaged the enemy, turning a standard attack mission into an emergency evac situation.
Yes, fighters and evac vehicles worked side by side to get the group to safety. But ultimately, it, didn't work out for them.
The spoilers.
Sorry.
So, moving on to development. The audio team have been up to their Foley shenanigans again. A recent recording session in Austin captured practical sound effects for a variety of in-game uses.
Sounds were captured that will be used for physicalized interactive props, bullet impacts, and things like that.
They also recorded various metal objects colliding with each other to emulate the sound of metal debris for scenarios like ship parts being broken or destroyed.
Yeah, and metal objects under stress and strain to be used for vibrational sound components for when ship hulls are under strain from damage or atmosphere.
That'll be cool when there's pressure and you're
you're gonna feel it.
That's cool. So impact and mechanical sounds were recorded in a hangar-sized space with microphones placed at close, medium, and far distances from the source.
Yeah.
This recording process is used to add a sense of depth and ambience to the environments, like Lorville.
Additionally, they used large impacts on this steel plate to create sounds that will be used when ships land, slide, or make contact with other objects. Devs have been digging into various aspects and features with a recent focus on combat, landing and takeoff, heat management, and atmospheric flight.
They've also been tweaking the controls based on feedback from players who got to try out the new flight model experience at CitizenCon, dialing in the throttle logic and control among other aspects. So stay tuned to future updates for the continuing development of the system.
And as we build out Stan and the entire universe, we continue to improve and refine the procedural tools that allow us to create the massive environments for Star Citizen.
Massive. Understatement.
Yeah. Couldn't say it any bigger with more emphasis.
Massive, yeah. For a look at how procedural layout tools are helping to build stations, HABs, and other large structures, let's go to Scott Fitzgerald, Wei Wan, and Patrick Agostaro.
The reason we developed the procedural layout tool is that we need a lot of locations, plenty of variation throughout the entire universe of Star Citizen. And to do that, we couldn't do it manually, so we needed a smart procedural tool to achieve this goal and do the work.
The key requirements for this procedural tool was to ensure that the art team didn't have to learn a new set of rules and change drastically their workflow. We wanted to be able to control prop placement, tinting, branding. We wanted to be able to say, make adjustments to an existing area. How much effort is involved in doing that? So user experience is key, and from that, we should be able to create a larger variety of environments with minimal effort, and therefore populate our universe quicker.
The core of the tool relies on these building blocks that we call elements. They represent, for example, rooms of a space station and just pieces of whatever the location needs to be built off. These building blocks are then connected to each other through specific attachment points that the artists or designers can define. And all of this is governed by a graph. The graph is usually used by designers because they want to control the logical flow of the location and make sure that the gameplay is suitable for the player. And this feeds information to the elements via tags, because they control which element comes in and which doesn't in the specific location. From these core things, we develop additional features, for example, an intelligent, smarter way to generate routes between these elements, for example, corridors, and also some verticality control so that we can build larger locations and larger space stations like the larger truck stops and refineries that will come later in the game.
The design requirements for the procedural tool is to allow us to have more control over how we distribute the rooms. So this in tail would bring towards a much larger rest stop. The idea here is we can now start blending into separate floors off one sort of stairwell node that we run from here. So with using the selection of rooms that we've configured through the LTA set, running some seed variations off of this node graph, we can start to make some very, very large rest stops.
Taking everything from the truck stop, learning from all that, refining the development of the pipeline as we went along, we can now roll that out to looking at HABs. For the HABs at the moment, we can theme them so it tailors to the occupant. So if we have a weightlifter, we can actually have weights there, you can have your protein shakes and so on, and those will spawn in appropriately. We can theme the apartments to do that. If he's a scientist, perhaps he has a little hobby on the side, a military guy, a security, and so on. But if it's a civilian, well, who knows, we could have any number of props that he'll have an interest in. So yes, it's really powerful to be able to generate a large number of apartments and HABs just by clicking a button.
Didn't you show something like that at a previous CitizenCon?
Busted. Yes, you're right. So yes, we did, and we showed basically the first iteration of the procedural layout tool with the procedural planet tools at the same time. So I like to call it procedural assistance rather than procedurally generating, because it definitely helps the designers along. Yeah. So Scott Way and Patrick, led by Marco, been working on this for a little while. The big job though that they had finished is one, tons of usability improvements, but generally moving the whole tool from a Python tool into C++, so properly embedding it in the engine and the editor and everything, not just a Python layer on top. So it's faster, a little bit easier to maintain. That's
very cool. What tools that we're working on right now that you're really excited about, that we can talk about?
That's a fantastic question. Oh man, I mean, it's gonna sound like not a very interesting tool, I think, to people, but it's a huge deal. It's the basic asset referencing database, I would say, is the one I'm most excited about. Yeah, because what that's going to give us the ability to do, and none of the community really sees this, our exclusions thing, the way our streams are structured, allows us to decouple our data from PU and Squadron 42 properly, so that there's no crosstalk really between them. Yes, Squadron can include some PU stuff, but PU stuff shouldn't be including Squadron stuff. So asset referencing database makes us ship only what we use and only what we need, rather than us kind of having to just take care of it manually. It'll be nice automated.
That's great. Well, that's going to be exciting. We've also just started working on a new 3D map feature that will make traversal easier. Here's Simon Bursey with more.
So the area we're working on right now is called the local area map. So we have the star map in the game, so this is the equivalent for when you're walking around on foot. At the moment we're at the end of the pre-visualization phase. The first thing was, is it going to be 2D or 3D? Everybody wanted to do 3D. So we did a test out and it looks pretty good. There's also things like, do we want to be able to see the enemy characters on there? So we did a little test for that. Also, it was interesting how we work out how the player moves between floors looking at the map, so how they look at the next floor up, next floor down, that kind of thing. It's a case of working out how to make that in the game in a functional way. So UI team itself is fairly small, and there's all these big systems in the game that this links in with. So we have to deal with the other teams. For example, we have to work out how we get the map information from the level, where do we store the locations of all the items, all that kind of thing. So there's lots of things to talk about with the rest of the studio to get this done. And also, it also needs a certain level of cool, so what about it looks good and makes it a bit different to other games. At the moment, it doesn't have quite that level of visual polish that we want, so we want it to be as good as what you'd see in a sci-fi movie, for example. So just now it's functional and it's fine, but we don't want fine, we want it to look really good. As the game's got bigger, obviously there's more places to get lost now, so that having a map has become more important.
With a feature like that,
Yeah.
he says that it's, just coming to the end of the previs stage. But how complicated is it to take a feature like that, all the way into the game? You may not be taking this direct feature itself, but what's the normal lifespan of a feature like that, and what it's going to take to get it in the game?
Sure, and I mean, it really, of course, depends on the feature. And I like that we're talking about 3D maps because it's something that I've been very, very, very keen to have. Actually, the first time I sort of traipsed around the outside of the one of the ships trying to get in, looking for a particular door, and I didn't know where it was. Now, a lot of people go, yes, learning immersion. I totally understand that, but sometimes I just want to know where to go.
You want to map. Sure.
So I think taking a feature, from just idea all the way to in-game already is a pretty decent chunk of time, right? But the most important thing, you've just got to get that unified objective or that intent. Yeah. What's the intent of the feature? The intent of the feature is not make a 3D map.
Right.
It's I want the player to know where he is.
Yeah.
I want the player to understand how to get to the next position or something like this, where it's, to use a production term, like a user story.
Right.
Basically, is some sort of unified objective to the feature. So once you get there,
Yeah.
you get some level of previs done. And as they were talking about, they want higher and higher visual fidelity with this and to make it look different from the other games because, yes, other games have done 3D maps like this before. You've got, Zelda Breath of the Wild, these kind of games.
Yeah.
That have done them before, so how do we differentiate? Or
What's
how do
our
we take
version?
some
What's our
great
version?
version,
Yeah.
great features out of that,
Inspired us,
and add some more to it. So
Sure.
basically, he'll get it from this concept, get the unified objective, get the nice visuals to it, and now get an in-game prototype going. And at that point, you're going to really work on your functionality. So that's where all the iteration will come in, right? And that will usually take the vast majority of that feature time. So usually, to get a feature just online and you're working with it and playing with it, it's really fast most of the time.
Sure.
It's maintenance and bugs after the fact that are going to come up. So that bit of iteration that goes on. Also, some things can add or remove complexities. One of the big pieces that he talked about was enemies. Okay, so those enemies on the map, and not being directly related to the feature, I'm going to ask my own questions. Are those enemies players or are those AI? Because actually, that might change how that feature is being developed, and it might take a little bit longer if that's actually going to be showing players as enemies. How do they know the players are enemies? Doesn't it have to check the reputation system? Doesn't it have to check the crime stats? Doesn't it have to check all of those sort of things just to show a little red blip on the radar, right? So, I think there's a lot of pieces that can go into that feature, but generally to take those features all the way through, you've got that concept phase, you've got, the unified objective kind of user story kind of phase, iteration on the feature, you've got a bit of polish at the end, some feedback, maybe a little more polish, and then a shipping.
There you go. That's cool. And what would be the difference on, say, something like that in a multiplayer environment like Star Citizen versus a single-player environment like Squadron 42?
It's a good question. It changes a lot between different features, right? Like if you have a weapon and you're firing the weapon in multiplayer versus single player, very, very different things. So it depends on what that map's going to have to do. But yeah,
Cool.
Multiplayer feature is definitely harder.
Yeah, very cool.
No
Awesome.
question. That does it for us this week. A big thanks to all the subscribers who sponsored these shows.
Yes, and of course, thanks to every backer for making the development of our games possible. Strap in and get ready for a wild and fun 2949.
49.
2019, but more, yep. And until next time, we'll see you around the verse.
Thanks for watching. For the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42, you can subscribe to our channel, or you can check out some of the other shows, and you can also head to our website at www.robertsspaceindustries.com. Thank you very much for watching.